Welcome into another episode of Behind the Catch Fence. I'm your host, David Hoffman. We're on for another interview episode, guys, but before I reveal this special guest, I'd like to give a quick shout out to No Copyright Music on YouTube. They're the ones creating the music that I'm playing. It's obviously no copyright music, so it's free. I'd like to thank you guys for that. With me being a broke college student, I'm grateful for you guys. Go subscribe to them, No Copyright Music. Welcome to another interview episode, and man, am I ever excited about our next guest. But before we introduce him, if you haven't seen our latest episodes with Alexander Rossi, make sure to go check them out. Now today, I'm honored to have one of the most versatile race car drivers in the world. Welcome, four-time X Games gold medalist, Tanner Foust. Foust has done everything from winning 4 Rallycross championships to adding 2 Formula Drift championships to his resume in back-to-back years. He's been a stunt driver for numerous movies including the Bourne series, the Fast and Furious Tokyo Drift movie, Ford vs. Ferrari, Need for Speed, and Iron Man 2. Besides his numerous stunts in movies, he's also broken multiple records including the longest ever car jump in the world when he did that at the 2011 Indianapolis 500. What he's most known for is his time as a host on the American version of Top Gear. Needless to say, Foust has done everything imaginable in the car world. Now enough with the chit-chat, let's get right into it, guys. We have a lot to cover. Tanner was kind enough to talk for a long period of time, and I'll tell you one thing, it is one of the most informative interviews I've ever done, so you guys will really enjoy this one. So sit back, relax, grab your favorite snack, maybe some popcorn, cheese puffs, whatever it may be, and enjoy this episode with Tanner Foust.
Hey guys.
Hey Tanner, how you doing, man?
Sorry about the technical difficulties there.
No problem.
Chargers, it's just crazy.
It's no problem at all, man. How you doing? I saw on Instagram you've been doing some aviation, going to that Sun and Fun event. How was that?
Oh, it was awesome. Are you into aviation at all?
I've honestly never even really, I don't know too much about it, but always willing to learn.
Well, you're missing out on a layer of life that is incredibly accessible. That was cool. It's kind of the SEMA of the aviation world is what Sun and Fun is. I think it's based around the experimental side of airplanes. So with airplanes, there's certified and then there's experimental. And the certified ones, you have to go through the FAA for every approval of everything. Certified ones, people can build them on their own, modify them. In recent years, the certified stuff, that sounds sketchy, right? And even the name experimental, but in recent years, the experimental stuff has become more and more reliable as electronics are more dependable and data on failures and things like that is more reliable. So in any case, yeah, I may be doing a TV show revolving around aviation and cars. I have a pilot's license and a small plane, and love flying. And so it's maybe a good opportunity to kind of combine a new passion of mine into an old passion of mine into cars and planes, putting them together like chocolate and peanut butter. How can you go wrong, right?
Can't go wrong.
Right.
How did that initially become a thing with aviation? Was it just more recently, or has this kind of been a passion that's kind of carried over for a lot of years?
I've told the story of kind of how I got into racing cars a few times, and in that pathway, I started working for an inventor who invented amusement rides. And that is the guy that kind of got me in the entrepreneurial way of thinking, which I used to chase down whatever I thought was the most fun thing to do for a living, which was cars. He was a pilot, went through several planes, loved airplanes. And so I always thought that I would have a pilot's license, but then the racing business actually worked and I actually got busy doing it. And that, it wasn't until Top Gear stopped shooting probably 5-6 years ago that I got my pilot's license and got to chase it down, and I've loved it.
And you mentioned just with racing kind of taking off, the business itself, where did your love for racing begin initially?
For racing, it probably was watching Colin McRae drive rally cars is where I really thought, wow, racing's pretty cool. But for me, I didn't have anybody in my family that was in racing. I wasn't familiar with sport, the various types of racing or the business of motorsport. I just liked driving. I knew that, I lived in Scotland when I was a kid. When I was 10 years old, My mom would let me drive 7 miles of our drive, 18-mile drive to school. She'd let me drive that because it was this private land. Police weren't allowed on it and stuff. And so I was addicted to driving early on. By the time I got my driver's license, it was by far the most fun thing that I got to do. Never, sometimes it takes knowing somebody in racing, like a parent or an uncle or something, or an aunt, that can introduce you to what, that this is a possible job, to actually think of it as a job. So I went to school to be a doctor, and my undergrad was a pre-med major in biology at University of Colorado in Boulder. And it wasn't until I was basically checking the final boxes of getting my degree, since I went that far, and it was my senior year. I was like, all right, I might as well finish this, but I'm pretty sure now I don't want to go to med school and be in the fluorescent tube lighting world for the next 9 years. I want to get outside and do something outside. And so that's, so it was from watching Colin McRae. And then when I got out of school, I worked as a mechanic in volunteering on a race team, SCCA race team on spec Fords, in return for enough seat time to get a license and do a race. And then kind of just figured out how to make it work from there.
What would you say was your big break during all of that?
My big break was drifting coming from Japan to the US. Because, I whittled at it, and I did the ride and drive thing, which the ride and drive world is like marketing events where they set up autocross tracks in various parking lots, and car companies come and they have a professional driver sitting with you in the right seat, and you coach people around courses or whatever, some coaching. I did everything I could to stay close to cars, whether the job was junk or whether it was really fun or good. But it wasn't until drifting, one of those jobs, by the way, was coaching ice driving in Colorado. So when drifting did come to the US, I'd been sideways for a long time at that point, and was ready to jump right in. And so when that sport started growing in the US, I had already had so much practice. There were a couple guys there that came from a rally driving background in a sideways type style. Samuel Hubinett, Reese Millen, myself. There were some that didn't stick with it, like Rich Rutherford, Nick Kuhnwalter. These are guys that did the original D1 events, but didn't really stick with it. But Samuel, Reese, and I made a living out of it. And so drifting come to the US, and then getting in touch with all those marketing departments. Drifting's great at, getting you in touch with companies' marketing departments rather than their racing sponsorship like marketing departments. One is a giant ocean and one is a little bucket of water. So getting involved with changing a brand's image or the mean age of their demographic is really expensive, and that's what drifting could do, where putting a sticker on a car and trying to win and get exposure on TV, it was a smaller ask, and you could affect the company in a smaller way. So it was, and you're fighting over that money with a ton of more people. So getting involved in drifting and the marketing side of these companies was an important business move and racing move.
And you mentioned with drifting, you won back-to-back championships in 07, 0, and 08 with Formula Drift. I didn't really know too much about Formula Drift until I started researching a little bit more. Just how does that kind of work, just with, having to be next to your competitor, trying to stay on the line, and just trying to, just be able to take advantage and get a win or something like that?
Drifting is a very visceral sport, because first of all, there's a qualifying, and then there's the actual event. The qualifying is one car at a time. Essentially, the closer you come to crashing a car you can't afford to fix, the higher your score is how it ends up laying out. Really, there are some objective parts to it, radar guns, things like that at that time that really helped separate different runs from people. But qualifying was very difficult, and there's a lot of people there, and they're loud, and that's a battle with nerves. Then the races, you're doing tandem, so there's two cars at a time. One car leads, and then the other car leads, and the first car is going as quick as they can through the course and hitting all the marks. The second car just has to match up to that, and then you're just waiting at some point for somebody to make a mistake. sideways with the back bumper rubbing the outside wall of these 3/8 mile or half-mile ovals at 100 miles an hour, and you're getting sucked into that car because of the draft. And so there's a lot going on. It's very hard to see through the smoke, very hard to anticipate what that driver is going to do. And it's really amazing. It's really amazing thing. I haven't competed in drifting in a long time, but when I would get knocked out, even when I was competing, and I would watch the final rounds, and watching from the outside, it's just like, this is freaking crazy. Like, this is so insane. These cars are not like slippery. Like, they don't just slide easy. They have over 1,000 horsepower. They make so much traction. They are very impressive in forward grip. They can do amazing drag times. And they're very, very fast cars. And so it's a lot of commitment to do it by yourself, much less door to door with another car. It really is a cool sport.
I was gonna say, I was wondering just how do you are so pinpoint on being able to match up with that guy ahead of you? Let's say you're tandem with someone and you're the follow guy. How do you kind of work away and almost have to react to how they're going and being able to keep it exactly with them as much as you can?
Once you're at that level where people are at the limit and they're going fast, it's very smooth. There's not a lot of just like if you're following a car around the corner at a limit in a race that's not drifting, that car is right against a gentle balance of the edge of the grip limit. So there's not a lot of abrupt changes in speed or direction. So once you're there and you're with somebody at the limit also, you can match up to them. It's smooth. You don't have to worry about them constantly changing speed and stuff. Plus, you can see the physics at work. So you can see what they're doing and where they're going to go. But then you also have some tools in your tool bag with drifting. So you can clutch in and handbrake momentarily. Even in fourth gear, when the tires are going 150 miles an hour, they have their own calipers for the handbrake. And a very, very strong drivetrain so that you can then again drop the clutch and it goes right back up to 150 miles an hour, which is very, very hard on drive shafts and stuff. But you can use those sorts of things to take your line higher up on the bank. You can also left foot brake while you're drifting a bit to kind of slow things down without necessarily losing the drift angle that you want to match up to that other guy. So while it's judged, and that's one thing I didn't like about it, turns out all motorsport is judged because rules change and there's a lot of politics, but they're judged. So it's what they're looking for, what the judges are looking for has changed over the years since I've been involved. Some for the good, some for bad, but it's just not a sport I'm super involved in anymore. So but it still is amazingly high skill level of those guys.
What would you say, just as you're continuing to learn about the sport, learn how to drive it, just what was the most difficult aspect about it?
The most difficult, well, there's constant innovation. And so nobody had really explored with aerodynamic stuff. The Japanese were kind of ahead, with D1 on some of the suspension and engine tuning side of it. And then I think it wasn't long, it was only 4 years or so into drifting in the US that Formula D surpassed D1 in its size and possibly technical capabilities of the cars. The biggest challenge was matching up to a car that was very different. Because when you're drifting, the car's limit is at a certain point, regardless of the driver. And some cars weighed 500 pounds more or less than yours. So that car could brake much quicker sideways. So when the braking zone would come up, you would need to gap them a little bit so that you didn't just run over them. So that was the hardest part, is being committed, but giving yourself just enough safety buffer that you could adapt to some variable that you weren't ready for.
And then just moving on, you ended up going into rallycross for, obviously you do that now as well. You competed in various series with that, including X Games. Just what drew you into rallycross initially?
Well, the whole time I was doing drifting, I was also rally racing, which in the forest for a Subaru dealership. So those 8 years I was doing drifting, I was doing rally the whole time. Won a production GT championship, but got a lot of rallies and loved rally racing, but you couldn't make a living at it in the US. In Europe, they had this sport rallycross, which was essentially like rally cars, twice the horsepower on a closed track instead of like racing out in the forest one at a time, 6 cars at a time. It was chaos. I saw a video of Marcus Grönholm, was one of my driving heroes. Racing in Sweden, I was talking to my manager and I was like, look, I mean, if I could do that, I would probably leave drifting right now and go to Europe and go do that. And Ford at the time was trying to sell the Fiesta in the US and the Focus, and they had to sell millions of them. And they really didn't have a sport that would make cars look cool in the US, small cars. So it was a good time to bring rallycross to the US. There were some like-minded people at Ford. Jost Capito was one of those. And my manager ended up owning the series in the US. And so I raced in Europe for 8-10 years, got the sport going, helped to get the sport kind of going here in the US, and then competed in the US with under various names, from Global Rallycross to ARX. Now it's Nitro Rallycross. But fundamentally, it's the most fun you can have in a car, and the cars are stupid fast. Now I think the future of rallycross is really electric, which sounds like sacrilege, but it's inevitable that we're going to be driving more and more electric cars on the road. Volkswagen has particularly made a big push, and I'm sponsored by Volkswagen. And pretty much if you are sponsored by a manufacturer and want to have a long-term ride, you have to be talking EVs at some point. Rallycross happens to be a sport that we've known for the last 8 to 10 years that it's perfect for electric. It's just taken a really long time to get the sport started in electric, but they're short heats. It's all about acceleration. The races are only 5 minutes long or so. The electric is really one of the only ways we can accelerate any faster. We're already accelerating to 60 miles an hour in under 2 seconds. And it's a young demographic, and the cars look like real cars, but they fly through the air and they do amazing stuff. And so, yeah, I think rallycross in the past has been very cool, and I think in the future it will be very cool, and I just hope it stays alive here in the middle.
And you mentioned this with the cars looking like an actual street car. Like, I think it's one of the things that I've always really loved watching is the fact that you see a Ford Fiesta, Volkswagen Beetle that you drive, you slap a wing on that, all sorts of bells and whistles, and it's like the coolest thing you could possibly do in a car, like in general.
I know, it's so fun. I mean, the way that Pastrana has put the nitro trucks together is amazing. 170-foot jump every lap. You can choose to take a gap jump over a tabletop jump that goes under a tunnel. I mean, there's a 3-layer jump there. It's like a circus, and we're like racing for time over that stuff. The Beetle is probably a $1 million or $2 million Beetle. It's not your average Beetle. And since Volkswagen doesn't sell Beetles anymore, we really won't be racing that anymore. But the future of rallycross is in electric, and hopefully the cool factor, like you're talking about, the fun factor of the driving itself, keeps people fanning about rallycross even when there's not the anti-lag and fire shooting out.
And just looking back at your career in X Games specifically, you won 4 gold medals in X Games competition. Is there one that stands out to you that means more to you, or was more competitive, or that kind of thing?
I think the first, I was racing for Vermont Sports Car then, who's been a competitor of mine for a lot of years since then. The first year I didn't get a medal, but it was like a dream team. I suddenly got a ride in a Subaru. It was a lesser level than the other 3 that I was competing with as my teammates: Pastrana, Ken Block, and Colin McRae. Pastrana and Ken both had a bit more rally experience than I did, but not too much. And of course, Colin McRae was Colin McRae. And then I had a Group N car. They had open cars, but I was able to hang with them in most times. And I was really proud of that. And partly for that reason, Colin and I kind of befriended each other a little bit there. And I took him in my drift car, actually took him out to Irwindale. We did some laps around that in my drift car, introduced him to Hulk Hogan, strangely enough, and drifted his son's, actually Samuel's old Viper. And, but I didn't get the win then. I got a puncture out in the forest. And instead of letting me change it, they wanted to showcase one of the things that is stage rally, which is changing a spare tire in the stage. It ruins you for being able to win an event, but it's something that can happen in rally. So they made me sit with that puncture until the stage started and then change it right over the line so they could cover it on TV. And it was heartbreaking. You know, I really was early in my career, and I really wanted to show my stuff, you know. But then following year came back, and I can't remember, it was that, yeah, I think it was that next year, came back with Chrissy Beavis, and we did the whole race in the stadium and jumping out of the stadium, the Home Depot Center. And it was a weird event. It connected with ice driving and drifting and all that stuff, and it just fell into my wheelhouse, and I got that one. And so that one was the most sweet. Long answers, I'm sorry, but yeah, that one. So the second one.
No, we always love long answers. Yeah, with X Games, how would you describe the atmosphere compared to any other event that you've been to, whether it's, you know, if you were a fan or if you were competing in?
X Games was, especially then, was really unique because it was, okay, the sports that it had in there, Supercross and what, you know, Best Trick, the bikes, skate, so many different things. And then to bring four-wheel cars in there was something totally new. You know, these guys would show up with a skateboard, be drinking at the bar every night, and then competing every day. And we're coming in with these, like, you know, 6 or 7 figure programs. Like it wasn't normal X Games, but they take any sport that's out there and then they put such a bright light on it. And you get, for the first time, live ABC coverage at that time, which was awesome. And so the organizers of Stage Rally were using X Games to promote Stage Rally. Then it shifted over to the promoters of Rallycross using X Games to promote Rallycross, and it worked. And then I think the validity of X Games in that world kind of went away. Nitro kicked in as Travis took his Nitro company to the next level, and with Nitro Rallycross, NRX, it's, you know, has potential to come back to those X Games days with good television package and insane events. But that was the spike in our year. It's kind of like the Indianapolis 500 to the Indy guys. There's the series going on, but really to get paid for all of that, you need to do well at the Indy 500 where everybody's watching. And so that's kind of how X Games was, is we had sponsorship for the whole year, but what they really were paying for was just that one X Games event.
I always remember this. I was that would be on livid when they got rid of, you know, Rallycross, everything that you guys got to do. Cause it's just, I always felt like that was probably one of the more, like, the cooler highlights of someone who's always loved watching racing and that kind of thing. It's, you know, but I'm so glad that, you know, NRX, that's going to be, you know, become a thing. And now September, I believe the season opener is, you know, but I'm, yeah, really excited about the NRX then.
I am too. And, you know, I will say, one thing I will say is Rockstar, I know I'm cheesing out because I literally have another hat right there, but Rockstar, I signed on with them because of X Games in 2006. And so I've had a really, I don't know, 16, 17 year relationship with them from them. So that's something that only X Games can do, is get kind of a guy out of the privateer-ish drifting world and you know, get a sponsor that can last that long, get a relationship that deep. Nitro, I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to do it this year because we may not be able to run our Beetles. They're a very old spec Beetle. I still think that they were built in 2016. I still think they're the best car in the paddock. I still think we could take on a lot of the new cars, but it's not a car that's sold anymore. So we don't own them. Volkswagen does. And it's probably, you know, it would be difficult to get them to let us take an old car out. So we may be waiting for the electric, but yeah, I'm really happy Travis has put together Nitro, very supportive of his program and whatever happens. So I definitely will be at the events, and you know, whether I have a team there or not, and look forward to hopefully doing another program with Andretti with the electric versions when they come out.
You mentioned a little bit earlier with Rockstar Energy. You've done a lot of really cool, stunts. Whether whatever it is, just what's probably been the coolest part of just that partnership that you guys have had over the past couple or 16, 17 years, you said.
Well, the coolest part about being with Rockstar is that they follow athletes. They don't necessarily follow, not calling myself an athlete, but they follow people, not necessarily the sport. So when I got into drifting, they had heard of drifting. It was like, okay, yeah, no, that's cool. They had sponsored Dai Yoshihara, a guy that I know very well. And with Rallycross, they're like, yeah, I mean, what is it? It's going to be like Lamborghinis or, maybe a GTO or something. It's like, no, it's going to be a Ford Fiesta. And they're like, no, we're not putting we're Rockstar, we go to party, we rage, we don't go to Ford Fiestas. And they did it. And then it's like, okay, well, now we want to be on a Beetle and we want to be on they're like, okay, this is, stretch. And they come along for the ride on all this stuff, just not knowing the sport, never heard of Rallycross, of course, nobody there, right? And when I was going out to Europe to do it, and they just supported it. And just because we said it was going to be cool, so it was going to have a good demographic, it was going to grow. And thankfully, all of those things were true. But having a sponsor that's kind of loyal or really loyal over that many years is really rare in motorsport. So it's something that I'm hugely thankful of. Stunts, Hot Wheels was a program that we did that Rockstar was also supportive of, but couldn't financially support because, Hot Wheels sells to kids and there's not a good crossover there. But Hot Wheels doing those jumps at the Indy 500, doing that big world record jump and then the world record loop with Greg Tracy, at X Games. Those two stunts were some of the coolest stunts I've done. They weren't in movies, obviously, but they were just super fun.
And you mentioned that 2011 Indy 500 jump. I've always been baffled. I've been a big Indy guy for a lot of years, but what all went into making that possible?
There was a lot that went into making the Hot Wheels record jump. The structure itself was kind of never done before. Obviously, being a world record, you're pushing lots of limits. At the time, I think the record was 300 feet. And it had been done kind of down a hill. So the truck was never really that high off the ground. In this case, we were going to have the truck like 50 feet in the air. So, and they wanted to start on top of a 100-foot door to make it look like the V drop, which is a toy where you would winch your car up to the top of a door and then gravity would make the truck jump. So, we jumped it over 50 times. We broke the world record 10 times in practice. Wind was a huge factor. On the day, we tested on Saturday. We didn't do so we built the structure out here in California, validated everything, changed all suspension, aerodynamic stuff. Because you're working with a toy, you could do any aerodynamic stuff you wanted because it doesn't have to look like the truck. So they would just make the toy after what you settled on, and then packed it all up, moved it to Indianapolis, built it up. We didn't do the jump until the record, but we did some speed tests on Saturday. Then Sunday comes along, howling wind, 20 degrees hotter. It was a carbureted truck with 900 and change horsepower. It was down 190 horsepower because of the temperature change and having the wrong jetting, but they didn't want to rejet it because the car was already up on the door and all this stuff. And they're like, well, if you don't make it, you had to see 3 digits on the speedo to clear the gap. And the boxes at the leading edge of the jump would not have saved you. So there was a bailout. Normally I'd hit 100 by the bailout. On the day when it was ready, set, go, I only saw 88 at the bailout, but it was accelerating fast enough that I really thought I could get triple digits. You had to be about 60% throttle when you left the ground in order to get the nose pitch right. Too much throttle and the nose stayed too high and the air could get underneath and flip it. Too little throttle and it would endo. So 60% was about right. Because it was going slower than normal, I held the throttle as late as I possibly could and then lifted off, and I only lifted to 80%. So it flew high. So then I hit the brakes. When you hit the brakes, just like with a dirt bike, it pitches that rotational moment goes into the chassis, pitches it. But it also kills the motor. So when you look at it this way, it starts rotating to the side. And it just made for an exciting jump. And So I know I just described everything in that, but it was a really fun day in front of 300,000 people. All the before gentlemen start your engines, all the Ganassi and everybody came down in their golf carts and they got front row seats to watch this foolish whoever yellow driver try to kill themselves. And then the truck landed and it was like, well, okay, let's do the race, and then fired up the race and went. That was cool.
I was gonna say, just how much just trial and error is there with a stunt like that? Is it kind of like you have to lay off too much or go full bore? Is there any, you just kind of have to find a line, a limit without hurting yourself?
I had a daughter already at that point. There was a lot of things in my life to live for, and it was one of those things. When it was proposed, it was like, yeah, sure, we'll just keep talking about it. And, eventually it's probably going to get so expensive it doesn't happen. But, in motorsport, if you want to get involved in a thing, you throw 10 balls in the air and maybe one comes down if you're lucky. So I was like, yeah, sure. Just went along with it. We had the dinners. It started on the napkin drawings, and it turned to engineering drawings. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh my God, they bought the trucks and now they're building these trucks and we're going to actually go do this. So yeah, at that point you're like, all right, now science takes over. So we started out small, 165 feet first jump. Got a feel for throttle position. We had a GPS sensor for speed. We had also a regular speedometer that had magnets on the drive shaft. Comparing those two were kind of interesting, and so you had to come up with what worked best. We had the guy from King Shocks out there who was adjusting on the fly as we were making the jumps. A lot to do with rebound setting in the rear. We had panels that we could change the aerodynamics on the front. And we just kept getting the jump bigger and bigger on the dirt. And then we went out with the on a paved surface with a jump that was on like train tracks. So I had a huge landing ramp, and then you had the takeoff ramp on train tracks. So you could just keep moving it back further and further. And eventually I think the gap was around 230 feet or 260 feet. And the world record, I think we broke the record. It was 332 feet is what we ended up jumping. And I think that was the biggest that we did. In practice, we broke 300 several times, but on the day went just an extra mile an hour maybe. And that made it happen.
And you mentioned just with other stunts that you've done, you did the indoor speed challenge in 2013 in the Ford Fiesta. That was a little bit more sketchy, I'm sure. Just how do you push yourself to go beyond the limit just to be able to break something like that when you're going towards a concrete wall at 80, 90, 100 miles an hour?
Borderline stupidity, honestly. There's that one was for Top Gear, and they found this world record. I literally saw this building yesterday, so it's funny we're talking about it. It's way up in Victorville. It's a 1 million square foot warehouse. And they're like, okay, we measured out the distance. Yeah, I think we could get faster than 90 miles an hour. I forget what the record was at the time, 80 or something. And I thought it would be really funny to have a world land speed record in a Ford Fiesta. So at that time I was racing for Ford. So got the rallycross car out there. We had an Audi R8 and a Corvette and Ferrari and stuff. But it turned out this warehouse was completely polished concrete, had zero grip. And so they put cornstarch, and they had enough to put 100 feet of cornstarch on the start and 100 feet on the braking, but only as wide as a car. And 100 feet, when you're going 90 miles an hour at a concrete wall, 100 feet is nothing. And I stalled the engine on the brakes with the Ford. So it's dead. I'm slipping the clutch, trying to get the tires to turn the motor enough to refire it. The steering is super stiff on that thing when the engine's dead. And try to line it up, and just got it on the cornstarch in time to get the braking done. So it was unnecessarily dangerous. If we had more cornstarch, it would have been totally fine. But that was an interesting challenge, and that's part of TV, just coming up with this. I don't know if there's a lot of bravery involved. It's more about figuring out a little bit on the numbers to see if you can do it and still have a small safety buffer, and then hope that you don't make a mistake.
You mentioned this with Top Gear. You hosted that show with Adam Ferrara, Rutledge Wood. That was probably one of my favorite shows of all time. It always will be.
Awesome.
To me, you guys seem to gel really, really well. How would you describe just the camaraderie that you guys had?
I think it was just like you think. It was, did we have roles on the show? Yes, but part of that was true. Adam genuinely crashed things all the time. And he hated being called the wrecker at first, but then he just kept on wrecking stuff. And then it's like, okay, just better own it. He crashed more stuff off camera than he did on camera, though. So that was bona fide. Rutledge is just a likable, super friendly guy who knows a lot of weird information about cars that is completely useless unless you're doing a very specific show on a specific car, and it just happens that knowing the serial number on a 72 Volvo front bumper is critical. So that, and then I came from a driving background where they didn't. And so my overconfidence against them, because in racing, you know, there's lots of fun competition between drivers and everybody's that's why you get into racing, because you're competitive. Does that come off like being a bit of a cocky dick on TV? Yeah, sure, it does. So that was my role, was to be a bit cocky and, you know, potentially lose anyway, because, you know, it's more fun if the cocky guy loses. But also that was my nature, was to be competitive and to talk a little bit of smack, because that's you know, that's the background I have. We got to go a lot of amazing places, drive a lot of amazing stuff. We still are great friends. They're two incredible people. They really, really are. Adam's one of the smartest guys I know, and Rutledge is one of the friendliest guys I know. Not to say that Adam's not friendly and Rutledge isn't smart, but you know what I'm saying. And they're both incredibly funny, which means I am not inherently funny. So it's nice that I can just be my straight self, and those guys can, you know, make the jokes, and it's all good. So we had a great time on that show. It was 150 days a year, tons of filming. And we did over 750 days of filming over the span of that show. But I'm proud of what we made. And I've met a lot of people like yourself who said, that they were strangely young when they watched it, which, yes, makes me feel very old, but it was kind of a family show, which was cool.
And just what all went into this, the challenges and figuring out what you guys were going to do? How much did the producer say, all right, here's an idea. What would you guys like to do with it? Was there like a lot of that, or is it, you know, kind of free or that kind of thing?
I mean, we came up with some of it, but most of it was talented producers with very little uh, checked in real laws of physics. So lots of big ideas, but could they really be accomplished? Probably not. And so we'd be sent out doing these things. I mean, ambitious but rubbish, I think, is what the British guys would say. And so you do your best to get it done, even if it really wasn't possible. And you know, it was Adam was much more involved. Rutledge was very involved in the car parts of it. There were times in the show where I was racing a full season in Europe and a full season in the US. So sometimes I just showed up and they were like, okay, we picked you out the purple one. Or like, oh my gosh, thanks. And I knew what we were doing, but I was the last one to chime in on which car they wanted. But that was only a phase when I was racing in Europe. The other times I was a lot more involved. And I think the producers learned as we went really how to shoot it. You know, when we did the first season, and I did a pilot for Top Gear US that didn't involve those two before that never aired for NBC. And it was very much like the British show. Jeremy was on set with us as a producer, Jeremy Clarkson. And then when we did the first season of Top Gear for History Channel, it was very much like that. We had the studio. It was a lot like the British show. And then it sort of got its own legs. And as we learned the audience and us, and then we no longer were like, you're the Richard, you're the Jeremy, you're the James. You know, we no longer were like slotting into what they had created. We were just three dudes doing our thing. And then it got to be super fun, especially after that first season. And it was a really great time, and I'm really happy that I still meet to this day, almost every day, somebody who comments on how much they really enjoyed that show.
And just out of all the challenges that you guys were able to do, one part of the question, what do you feel is the most enjoyable to do? And then on the flip side, what do you feel is the most sketchy / borderline dumb type of thing to do?
Usually that's the same thing. The most fun stuff is the stuff that, you know, you are getting away with something to do it. I strangely was more probably half host, half stunt, like safety and stunt coordinator, because, you know, we would go do these things with cars, and Adam, the first show was in this Cadillac, and we're on this dirt track. It's like a motocross track with jumps. And we're jokingly like, oh yeah, just take that one full throttle, it'll be fine, blah blah blah. And he like doesn't have a anything to compare, like what is okay and what isn't, and no internal like risk system. He grew up doing stand up and stuff like that. And so he just launched it full throttle. It's like, he told me to go full throttle, and he aired this thing, bent the Cadillac like a banana. The seatbelt I literally had wrapped around the headrest poles because it wasn't really working. And I was thinking he recognized that, take it easy because the seatbelt doesn't really work. So we got away with a lot. And I loved working with the old cars when we got to kind of hit each other and just mess around, because, like when you do a little, like a jump in a rental car, have you ever done that?
No, not yet. I don't think so.
Okay. Well, when you do a jump in a rental car, you will find that it triggers a laughter that is just about as hard as any laughter you've ever had. There's something about that. And crashing into your friends in cars that that's what you're meant to do. I mean, there's something incredibly fun about that.
I remember, I think it was actually yesterday I'd watched the one episode is where you were drifting. They're trying to see, all right, what all can Tanner drift? Can you drift everything? And the one was like a bus, that kind of thing. That was a little bit sketchy, I'm sure. Almost flipping that, it almost seemed like.
Yeah, that was in the first season, I think, or second season, when we still did the studio. And in the US, our shows are very specific time, right? They're like 44 minutes on the dot, and then the rest commercials. In Europe, the show could be 56 minutes, it could be 47 minutes, it wouldn't matter. In the BBC, they didn't have commercials. But for us, they got to the show and they had 7 minutes left. And they're like, well, we can't just have them talk in the studio for 7 minutes. We got to come up with something. And I had proposed to them that we do the show kind of like Saturday Night Live, where we have certain skits that are like reoccurring. And one of the things I wanted to do was a Will It Drift. And so then they literally, we shot the studio at El Toro, which is also where we tested the Hot Wheels jumps. And they just rented a bunch of stuff, ice cream truck, or like a lunch truck and a bus and then an ambulance. And then I was like, okay, well, if we're going to do this, I mean, this is military grade concrete runway we're doing this on. So I hosed it all down. I got soap, bought case of soap, put all the soap down. Didn't help at all. Like, it was so grippy. Like military grade concrete is grippy no matter what. And so I could barely get any of those things to slide around. So yeah, it was dangerous. And it sort of came from the only time I got fired from a job was when I got caught doing donuts in the Beaver Creek West lot in the town of Vale buses when I was a bus driver at 18. And so I told that story about doing donuts in these buses, and they're like, oh, sweet. Okay, let's do that. But that's snow. That's not like military grade concrete and soap, but it was still super fun.
How long were you a bus driver for when you were 18?
Well, they wanted me to stay. So I was a ski bum there. I took 2 years off school. It was 91 or 92, something like that. And they wanted me to stay for Christmas. And I had already told them that I was going home for Christmas. I was a college kid. And so I was going to have to leave anyway. So I was a bus driver from the beginning of the ski season, so like October to December. And I didn't pick up passengers usually. I mean, I picked up some drunk people after the bars had closed. They were hitchhiking. But I worked from 6 in the evening to 4 in the morning, and drove the buses through the bus wash out to the Beaver Creek West lot where they got fueled, and then parked them in Avon, and slid around every corner possibly could. Now remember, these are the buses that have the front tires behind you, and you have just this big dish. And so when that thing is spinning, you're like getting pulled around backwards. It was the most bizarre, awesome thing. 3 guys in the back having a good time, hanging on for life. But yeah, my boss was in the parking lot one night in the Suburban and fired us all. It happens.
It happens. I know. I was a couple years ago. My boss still doesn't know this, but I was working at a local college where I used to live, and I took a Ford Escape. That was the company car that we used, and we'd have to go and put up trash in like these dumpsters. And it's like this big gravel road, and a lot of dirt on it. I'm like, all right, I saw this in like a Top Gear or something like that. I'm like, let me try this. So my friend is in the passenger seat. He's like,
a liability issue right now. Okay.
A little bit, but so I just kind of gassed it and then slapped down the e-brake, then cranked it to the left. It happened to kind of stick just a little bit. I'm like, okay, this is actually kind of cool. And then did a couple donuts up there where the trash bins were, but thankfully I don't work there anymore. They still don't know about it, but a little bit of a fun little random thing.
Honestly, that's training. That's not even hooliganism. You're training at that point. You're in a safe environment. There's nothing to hit, right? Really. I mean,
Could have been a dumpster or two just chilling there,
yeah,
but
you had some space.
Mhm.
And yeah, I mean, gravel, you get away with a lot, but I always promote people trying to, get some car control whenever you can. Even a go-kart track, you can gain car control experience if you can focus on learning there instead of just crashing into your friends. But it's yeah, that's awesome. Glad you didn't get fired. I did.
yeah. Didn't quite work out as well, but you've done a number of stunts, for movies, whether that was the Fast and Furious, Tokyo Drift, or the Ford versus Ferrari, the Bourne movies. Just what all goes into just doing a stunt for a movie, and just how did that come about originally?
Well, movies are super cool in that they immortalize certain styles of fighting. They immortalize stories. So there's always this chip or honor, I guess, about being in certain movies. That doesn't necessarily make the biggest or most remembered movies the most fun, but sometimes the most fun movies are like the low budge movies where they don't want to wreck the car and they want the acting is kind of in the driving. So to answer your question, it really varies. Like if you're doing a big stunt or a big jump for like Fast and Furious, like a new one, there's a huge amount that goes into that. But at the end of the day, it comes down to the driver. Usually in that case, it's a stunt person who also is talented at martial arts, setting themselves on fire, skydiving. Like stunt people are amazing and they're one-stop shop, good at so many things. We in the driving side of things are pretty fortunate in that we come in as specialists for driving. And a lot of us come from a racing background or drifting or whatever, which is expensive to go practice. So it kind of keeps the industry fairly, or the specialty fairly small. But with those big stunts, yeah, sometimes you're driving to the crash. Sometimes in a movie like Tokyo Drift, you mentioned that one, there's a lot of acting in the driving. So I was DK in that one, or double DK, which is in the gray Z. He was always a good drifter in the movie. So I got to always slide around, have a good time. Reese Millen, who was driving for Sean in that movie, or the good guy, he started out as a bad driver and then had to get better. So Reese really had to be acting with his driving, and it's really hard to safely and consistently do the same sloppy maneuver and crash in the exact same spot as if you were out of control. It's way harder to do that than just to drive nice and clean, slide through the scene. Dukes of Hazzard was one got to drive. That was more like a personal favorite. It was my first movie. I just did the first 15 minutes of the movie or so in the generally, and then it was Billy Prickett and a police officer for the rest. But my first movie to get to drive the generally, I mean, that was the show that I grew up on. These good old boys ripping, through Hazard County, leaving dirt rooster tails everywhere they went. I mean, that was a super dream. But yeah, the movie's amazing. I mean, at the whole industry, there's a couple hundred people. It's like an army that just moves through an area, and just to get something on screen, it seems so excessive, but it's very cool. It takes a lot of people to do stuff safely.
And what does like a typical production day look like for you? I'm sure it's a lot different from the actors, or is it kind of just depend on what scene they're shooting and that kind of thing?
Yeah, in some movies, you're a soldier. So some movies, like Ford versus Ferrari, we had a lot of stunt drivers. 90% of the driving is just background sweeping through this or hanging next to, Christian's character while you're, doing something. Or I actually was on camera for that as a guy who finished third, Ronnie Bucknam. But that was like literally, if you blinked in the movie, you completely missed that scene. So most of it is just, hey, come on through here. If you can, just, give us a little action here. Is just being a soldier. And that there, you have very little responsibility. Just do it safely. And then when you're doubling a lead character, then it's very different. Then you are working all the time and you're very busy. The days go incredibly fast. The responsibility is heavy because a lot of times there's a guy holding a camera right where you're going to slide your back tire. while you're shooting that, they'll have you walk over to the next intersection, say, hey, in this one, we want you to come through here. And you don't know all this stuff in advance, really. They'll say, in this one, you do this reverse 270, and we need you to end up here and then take off out of there. We'll break it into 3 different shots or whatever. And so you really have to try to identify where the cameras are, what angles they're going to see, what's going to look cool and what isn't going to look cool, and just save the exciting stuff for those angles. To keep it safe. You don't want to go drifting through a bunch of people that are just there holding lights when you're not even on camera yet. Obviously, you're not on camera if there's guys holding lights there. So a lot of it is translating what they want to see and feel on the screen into physical reality in a safe way that gives them the vibe that they want, which is usually, an over-the-top vibe. And I love that challenge. So the more involved I can be in, the better.
What would you say was your like favorite scene that you ever got to do in a movie? Or is there a couple of the ones that kind of are up there?
There was a remake of a Patrick Swayze movie called Red Dawn. This one happened to be Chris Hemsworth, who hadn't done Thor yet, but he was bulking up for it. So it was, first of all, I thought it was funny. The hair and makeup guy almost quit because he saw me doubling him, Chris Hemsworth, who was like 250 pounds and 6 foot whatever. And so I'm sitting on Fernie pads the whole time. And Chris was amazing through the whole thing, and he was involved in a lot of the stunts. It was a very small production, but I show up the very first day, and stunt coordinator's like, okay, here's the deal. We got this truck. It's got reinforced radiator, mud tires, lock differential, 300 horsepower. You're coming through here. All of a sudden, all these paratroopers start jumping out. So you got to slide around this corner. They start jumping out in front of you. You go through this, you bash through this fence, slide into this tree. We got it all scored out, so the tree will fall over. Go through that fence, hit that playground set, go through across the street. And I'm just like, really? And they're like, oh yeah, we rented. It was in Detroit. It sadly, when Detroit economically was really bad, they rented the whole block. We just bashed neighborhood after neighborhood through their backyards. And it was so unbelievably fun. Just, fences blasting over the top of this thing and just sliding and crashing into stuff the whole time. It was like therapy. I don't know. I did 2 weeks of that and was like completely at peace with the world. And it was just a really fun time. So that was probably my favorite 2 weeks. Tokyo Drift was amazing also, but Red Dawn was just a lot of fun.
I was gonna say you can't go wrong with being able just to bash a car into fences that or whatever else you may whatever else it may be, and just have a boatload of fun and get paid to do it too.
Everybody was just having a good time, and the guy directing it was a previous stunt guy, so he really liked the stunts, and the explosions were big and the fires were over the top, and everybody, we were just enjoying it. But there is something fun playing in dirt. Normally you're always on the pavement, but when you're bashing through yards and city parks and stuff like that, there's something super fun about that. I had, stunt guys in the back while jumping the truck, and they're just holding on to straps, and I see their legs in the rearview mirror up in the air and landing. You come talking to them like, oh my God, that was awesome. Like everybody just was really having a good time. So it was a fun 2 weeks.
And just looking at your career overall, whatever it may be, just how do you stay focused and block out all of just the danger factor that may go into whatever it may be?
The danger factor, honestly, I think I'm a scientist, and that's what I got into. All studies was always about science, and I am pretty convinced, whether it's true or not, I believe the science that I can find that says this anyway. I'm safer doing the stuff that I do than driving down the 405 in LA. Having a 5-point harness and safety gear and ambulances around. Racing is remarkably safety. Yeah, on a set, sure, you can get pushed to do stuff where your safety gear really isn't up to spec, and you can get pushed to do some dangerous stuff in a movie, but then it's on your responsibility to throttle back and just say, look, this really isn't safe. We should probably try to break this into 2 shots. It's going to get broken up in editing anyway, so sometimes experience comes in to make it safer. There's a lot of calculated risk, I would say, to answer your question, but and a huge amount of trust for your team that's involved, because it's not like early days of drifting was I was over there checking the torque on every wheel because I put the wheel on. Now it's, you just get good people around you, and everything is going to be predictable. And then it's just on you not to, just wad it all up. And I like that responsibility.
And the final two questions, how would you say you've been able to use your degree to, to be able to use it in your career now?
My degree is strangely applicable to what I do as a racing driver, stunt driver. Some of my favorite classes in school were physiology classes and behavioral and classes, but physiology specifically, the way, because what I deal with is the human condition. Anything that you do, we're not hardwired for driving at 60 miles an hour. We're evolved to run at the fastest. Anything over 20, 30 miles an hour, the way that our eyes lock on things, the way that our systems work against us for driving. And so having a recognition of that and understanding sort of the nuts and bolts of the human condition and our limitations really helps me avoid adrenaline, helps me avoid any kind of sensory overload situation where the instincts boil to the surface. Because as soon as any racer feels adrenaline, they are crashed. There's no instinct in driving that is good. Steering into the skid is one, but it still holds too long and you end up spinning the other direction. So it's all of those instincts have to be replaced with technique, and I understand that maybe more from all those classes.
I feel like I kind of have now a new found appreciation for science overall, because I know when I took my last science class this past semester. I mean, I don't know. I don't understand it. It's a little bit too much for my headspace, but it's just cool to hear like how you've been able to apply it and, into racing and whatever it may be, and just be able to use it for like to focus and kind of get an advantage in a way.
100% it's an advantage. Or it was in the beginning. I think everybody's a scientist at the limit, but the thing that I'm amazed about is how, everything physical, or anything discipline related or business even, I mean, you're dealing with the human condition, and all of us are either snowboarding our way through life. I mean, that's nothing against snowboarders, but we're either being very passive or we're taking a proactive approach at helping our performance. I've had a couple mantras in my career. Some of them have been, keep driving fun. And, that's why I got into Top Gear and Rallycross, because they're the fun with cars. I was really alarmed when my daughter and her friends are getting a little bit older, and I was thinking that they were not wanting a driver's license. My daughter wants a driver's license, but a lot of her friends are like, they'd rather get a new phone or whatever. So now my mantra sort of shifted to mobility, and I really think that it's part of our responsibility as humans is to get out and do stuff, because it is very easy for our brains, which are spectacular, to get satisfaction out of just looking at some glass and existing in a cyber world, or existing, the fact that it's called social media is such a oxymoron. But so not to make myself sound really old, but I just want to try to promote getting out and going places and doing things. The pilot's license has really changed my thinking of that, because it's so easy in this country, and we could be the last generation to be able to get a license and go places for free, essentially. It's so easy to be mobile and go places. So it's, that's something that I'm hoping to push in future projects.
Man, you've definitely, you're probably probably the smartest person I've been able to interview on this show so far. And that's not saying anything.
John Force on your list. Come on now. He's going to give you a call.
Yeah, John, he's pretty interesting to say the least.
He's awesome.
He's a great guy.
In the Ford days, he was a Ford guy, and he's spectacular.
That is true. Final question. Looking back on your career, what's been the most rewarding part of it?
Most rewarding part for me is that from what I hear from people and what I try to embrace is inspiring people that want to figure out how to make a living in the industry that they're passionate about and maybe otherwise wouldn't have thought possible. Maybe inspiring them to take a step to do that. There's, I was on the path to being a doctor, and I would have loved being a doctor. And all my family, a lot of people in my family are doctors, and I think it's an amazing profession. I never would have thought that I could make a living driving cars, but sometimes you just got to get the dirty job close to the ideal job and learn how to get the ideal job. And I love that through social media, through whatever, I can be reached by anybody. And I mean, it's a blessing and a curse, but I think a large percentage of people that reach out to me are looking for advice on how to get involved in an industry that they're excited about and feel like, and maybe they even hear it from their parents, but feel like there's no real way for them to make a living doing it. And sometimes they just need a little inspiration to try. And especially if they're young, there's no harm in just going out there and getting even a not fun sounding job in the industry that they want to be in.
And that's all the questions I have for you, Tanner. I appreciate you taking the time and just wanting to come on the show. And I wish you nothing but the best, with whatever you end up doing here in the next couple of months. And, thank you again, man.
Thanks, bud. Appreciate it, David. All right.
You have a good day, man.
All right. You too.
I hope you guys enjoyed this episode of Behind the Catch Fence with special guest Tanner Foust. Growing up, watching Top Gear every week with my dad was always one of my fondest memories that I had as a child, and it was just really enjoyable hearing some of Tanner's highlights from the show. Foust has a resume in motorsports that is extremely hard to match, and to hear stories from his prolific career was just so much fun. I'd also like to give a quick shout out to Nitro Rallycross, as their season will officially get the green flag in Salt Lake City on September 24th through the 25th. Foust, alongside Travis Pastrana, Patrick Sandell, Scott Speed, Ken Block, and others will be competing in the series. If you're a fan of any form of motorsports, you should mark your calendars because it's bound to be electric. Anything that Nitro Circus touches, it's going to be electric, so make sure to go and watch that. I'd like to thank Tanner once again for coming on to the podcast. We are just about out of time for today's episode, so look out for more interviews and content over the next couple weeks. Before I go, make sure to follow this podcast on Twitter and Instagram @BehindCatch. Thank you for listening. I'll catch you guys later.